2010 marked the 200th anniversary since the birth of classical composer Fryderyk Chopin. Elizabeth Njoroge, Kenya's premier opera singer, was invited to visit his native Poland in a cultural exchange, and I accompanied her to document through our Kenyan eyes a country we knew almost nothing about. We basically knew that Poland had a complex and turbulent past. Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 sparked off the Second World War, the end of which saw the Soviet Union institute a new communist government analogous to the rest of the Eastern Bloc. 50 years on, Poland's solidarity movement played a key role in eroding, ultimately leading to the collapse of the communist regime, paving the way for democracy in the rest of the Eastern Bloc. We wanted to know what it means to be Polish and how they expressed their cultural identity. We arrived and were warmly welcomed by our guide, Karolina. Our first impression of Warsaw was the multiple influences in the architecture. During the Second World War, an astonishing 85% of the capital was destroyed. From 13th century walled Old Town, remnants of the Polish Renaissance are straddled by domineering Soviet-style strongholds. Warsaw has for most of the 20th century been under reconstruction. Incongruent, the eastern and western appearance seem to conceal the contemporary nature of the Polish identity. So while travelling to Żelazowa Wola, a little town an hour's drive outside of Warsaw where Chopin was born, we asked Karolina about Poland's recent past.
In communism, you had to work somewhere, and then usually you finished your studies and the government would pick you a job, or that you got the suggestion to get the job, and it was illegal not to work. So actually people more or less had the same amount of money, but there was no way to spend it. You weren't traveling so much, or maybe you were traveling around Poland, like you could go for holiday to the coast, but you couldn't go abroad, or it was extremely hard to get abroad. You didn't have a passport, because they didn't want people to emigrate to another countries. There was nothing to buy. If you wanted to buy something, you got this small paper thing, so you could only get 1 kilo meat a week, and then you went to the shop, and then they cut it out that you've already had it.
So things are really different now, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Everything's really changed.
We arrived at a charming little church that 200 years later hasn't changed much. It was here that Chopin's parents married in 1806, and where 4 years later he was baptized. A short drive away, at the rehabilitated home where the infant Fryderyk spent his first 7 months, we were lucky to catch an outdoor recital of the master's poetic works.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you to a Sunday concert at Chopin's birthplace in Żelazowa Wola. Today, a Japanese pianist, Rinko Kobayashi, will play Chopin's works for you. Rinko Kobayashi.
Before leaving, we met up with the director of the Polish Institute of Culture, a government agency shaping Poland's face today.
What is Polishness? What is it that you...
You know, at this point, right now, last 20 years, Polishness is pure fun. Since Poland regained its independence in 1989. Before then it was pretty green, pretty sad, and pretty... What is Polishness?
Yes.
Persistence, stamina, stubbornness sometimes,
Toughness,
courage, to the extent of bravado, solidarity, that's a very important word. I would think that certain creativity. I tend to think of my fellow Poles that we are a pretty creative nation. If you look at Polish history, the nation, the country has been divided, partitioned between neighboring powers. And the only way for the nation to survive, for the language to survive, was to cultivate culture, its culture. And that's how Poles have survived as a nation, as human beings, and also as anarchists and individuals. It's the only thing that unites Poles. It's the only thing that all Poles are proud of.
Poland has more rapidly than any other ex-Eastern Bloc nation shaken off its communist past. In a period of economic recession, it has the fastest growing economy in Europe, and today the bygone communist era, when basic commodities were scarce, have been replaced by an open relish in thriving westernized culture. But the uniqueness of the strong Polish identity has also survived. At the national radio's Channel 2, whose broadcast includes classical and folk music, the chief editor for music journalists took us through how mediums such as radio drama covertly preserved nationalist ideology and how contemporary music reflects Poland today.
In the sociological point of view, is very interesting for us because there are completely new young people who came for the Baroque concert. They go to the Baroque concert and the contemporary concert. They completely omit middle, for example, romantic classical music beginning of the 20th century. They don't go to the Philharmonia, for example, for the normal traditional concert, but they go to the Krakow, to the Gdańsk for the festival of Baroque music. And after, I see the same people in the contemporary music, experimental jazz, avant-garde. So we see it's really sociological things, very important for us.
Why do you think that these are?
Because they try to consummate the culture in the new wave. They try to find the other space for creativity, and they find this creativity in the Baroque ancient music and in the contemporary.
Backed by progressive corporate sponsors, public parks are venues where popular Polish musicians bring together the young and the old. Back in 1817, Chopin's father taught French at the Warsaw Lyceum, moving the family into apartments at the Kazimierz Palace, today's Warsaw University. It was here that the 7-year-old Fryderyk showed unusual musical genius and took informal piano lessons. Aged only 11, he had performed for Alexander I, Tsar of Russia. 16-year-old Chopin was already feted as the best pianist in Warsaw, though it wasn't until then that he began to study music theory and composition at the Warsaw Conservatory. Many of his compositions were inspired by his emotional and sensual experiences, the best recorded his infamously dogged relationship with the French novelist Georges Sand. In 1828, a keen traveller, he'd ventured into Western Europe. But the 1831 November uprising ensured that he never again returned to Poland. Settling in Paris, he is often mistaken to have been French. With a nostalgic and tormented heart, he shunned public performance, preferring to play in the salons of aristocratic social gatherings and his own apartment for small groups of friends. A reluctant celebrity, Chopin gave only one public concert a year, and it is difficult to believe that he made just over 30 public appearances in his lifetime. Today in Warsaw, the very streets that Fryderyk last walked as a 20-year-old are literally alive with his music. To commemorate 2010 as the year of Chopin, for a few days his native country's National Opera House is hosting the public for the first time in an international festival known as La Folle Journée, featuring over 450 artists in 120 concerts. Known as the event where classical music lets its hair down, we'd earlier met the chairman of the opera and one of the festival directors who'd told us tickets were in most of the salas or halls priced to bare minimum to attract old and new audiences. Being a distraction to the artists, cameras were not permitted in the halls. So when Liz joined the multitude of enthusiasts, I took the opportunity to find a different art form I'd heard was currently buoyant, even dominant, over pop since the opening up of Poland's borders. Globalization has largely leveled out youth culture. As a teenager, fascinated with traditional folk dance, Chopin's mazurka compositions were based in two musical forms, the slow kujawiak and fast oberek. Mazur up to the 19th century denoted an inhabitant of the Mazovia region, the root of the Mazuria, one of which we watched back at the festival's domed tent. It was this modern tribute to a preserved Polish sentiment that would bring our cultural quest to an end. A master composer's legacy had brought us here, and the universal language of music had provided us with an insight into a country's diverse heritage. We'd seen through music how Poland had preserved, transformed, and adapted its cultural identity. Our journey wasn't complete before Liz, Kenya's own opera singer, proved in a masterclass that in Poland, a country that had seemed so distant, we'd found a mirror in music.